Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Now, I must apologize. The first video I tried to put out there today, unfortunately, the audio on good old OBS failed. It does that from time to time. Hopefully this has corrected the said problem. Also apologize, it's been a few days since I have posted content. Have been very busy the last couple of days. I have some fairly early starts, and it makes it much more difficult to produce content. Well, we are back at it today. Should also be able to produce some content tomorrow as well. Now, today we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and the Ukraine. It's very important that information is disseminated in a proper manner. Here in the Western world, here in the United States, Western Europe, news is not always making it to those who need to hear the news. Now, one specific news item that is being reported, or not so much being reported, is the challenge of the Ukrainian military to fill its ranks with both volunteers and conscripted soldiers. In the early stages of the war, a couple of years ago, the Ukrainian military had a large influx of volunteers wishing to fight for the Ukrainian army in all positions. Now, that has changed dramatically from where we were just a couple of years ago. The Ukrainians are no longer getting large numbers of volunteers. In fact, the conscript notices that go out, most Ukrainians are not responding to those notices. We are starting to see very heavy-handed tactics by the Ukrainian military to induce those being conscripted to fall in line and report to training facilities for combat duty. There is another burgeoning business also taking place inside of Ukraine. That is the human smuggling business, specifically designed to get fighting-age male Ukrainians out of the country and into Western Europe. Most of this smuggling is obviously happening in Western Ukraine, through the borders of Poland, Slovakia, the mountainous, very rugged border with Romania, the Carpathian mountain range. In some cases, well, not in some cases, in many cases, Ukrainian fighting-age males are paying approximately $6,000 US to be smuggled out of the country. They want to get out. They do not want to stay and suffer the ramifications of being inducted into the Ukrainian military and sent to the front lines. Over the past several weeks, the past actually few months, we have seen a heavy uptick in the amount of casualties the Ukrainian army is suffering along the front lines. This coincides with the Russian use of GLONASS guided glide bombs, where at one point the Ukrainian military could essentially bury itself in the front lines. We saw that take place near Avdiivka, where the fortress of Avdiivka had many underground tunnels, bunkers, fortifications that were under the ground. These fortifications were essentially immune to Russian 152 millimeter, 122 millimeter, 130 millimeter artillery fire. So the Russians could barrage these locales, and the Ukrainians would oftentimes not suffer casualties if they were underground. Now, with the use of these glide systems, these guided glide bombs are much larger than the 152 millimeter artillery systems being used. You're seeing the Fab 250s, the Fab 500s, the Fab 1000, much bigger systems, Fab 1500s. These are much bigger systems in terms of packing large amounts of explosives that have the ability to bury into the earth and then detonate, and then essentially burying alive Ukrainian fighters, Ukrainian soldiers in these fortifications. That's what's happening in Avdiivka. We're also seeing this also taking place west of Bakhmut as well, near Chasiv Yar. Some of the most fanatical Ukrainian units, some of which are ideologically driven, some of these units are refusing to participate in combat operations near Chasiv Yar. And one of the reasons for that is the use of these Russian glide systems, these guided glide bombs. And it's causing a tremendous amount of Ukrainian casualties. So much so that a Ukrainian fighting-age male who receives a draft notice, he has already seen friends, family members essentially disappear on the front lines. When you're hit with one of these very large systems, these glide bombs, because of the amount of explosive that is in these systems, you often don't find a body. They're just gone. And oftentimes the Ukrainian state simply declares that they are missing. Can't find a body. Can't confirm. The only way to confirm is via a DNA test on a piece of the body. And that's what's happening. But the Ukrainian military is in an incredibly precarious situation right now. The Ukrainian military doesn't have the ability to respond in the same way. Do the Ukrainians have access to some U.S. JDAMs? Yes, they do. But they can't use those JDAMs in terms of large amounts of numbers like the Russians are using their glide bombs. The Russians can deploy up to 1 to 200 glide bombs use in one day. In some cases, we have seen 700 strikes in 1 week. The Ukrainians, best case scenario, could probably launch between 6 and 12 JDAMs against a Russian target or Storm Shadows. They're more expensive, and they don't have the launch assets to launch these systems, the Ukrainians. The Russian Air Force, as it stands right now, is essentially has the same capacity as it did since day one of the war. Since day one. That's coming from the Pentagon, not MFAN. In fact, we could start to see the Russian military, the Russian Air Force, in fact, start to grow in size and start to see new assets, new weapon systems coming online, such as the Su-57. We believe the Su-57 is participating in frontline combat, although not talked about much. But again, a very precarious situation for the Ukrainians. If we look at what has happened over the course of, say, the last week, and we look here near Chasiv Yar, and I'm going to go back to essentially March 30th, where you, the viewer, can see what has exactly happened along the front line as the Russians continue this methodical advance west. And you can see where we are now. The same in the south, just to the west of Avdiivka. We'll go back essentially 10 days. You can see exactly what is happening along the front line. And again, this is a pro-Ukrainian mapping service. So in fact, we believe the front lines have probably been pushed a little further than what is being reported here. So this is within the vicinity west of Avdiivka. And this continued advance west by Russian forces. Again, very methodical, designed to fix Ukrainian positions and then devastate those positions with these guided glide munitions. And that's where we set. Very, very difficult time for the Ukrainian military. Now, as for the Russians, in terms of recruiting and fielding troops, are they having the same issues? No, they're not. Right now, it appears the Russians are very much focused on increasing the capacity of its military-industrial complex. You can recruit all the soldiers you want, but if you're not providing those units with weapon systems, tanks, armored fighting vehicles, drones, aircraft, what have you, munitions, rifles, you're not going to have a very good combat unit. And that's what has surprised Western nation states as this conflict continues. The ability of the Russians to ramp up that military-industrial capacity and then produce new weapon systems. Now, at the same time, we are seeing the Russian military expand. Could it expand faster? It could. But we have not seen the Russians institute that general mobilization. I would assume that the Russians right now, like I just mentioned, are much more focused on increasing that military-industrial capacity. Then, once that hits peak, we could see general mobilization, possibly, depending on how relations continue to sour with Western nation states and if this turns into a third world war. Which, again, my contention is we are continuing down that track. So again, more to come very, very soon. As always, thank you for joining us. Please feel free to comment in the comment section. And as always, have a good day.